Hello, my name is Michael Tillinger and welcome to the Ubuntu Contributionism presentation. This is the presentation that I recommend everybody should watch, whether you're new to the Ubuntu movement or if you've been with us since 2005 when this philosophy of contributionism first emerged. This is January 2020, so it is the most recent and up-to-date version of the Ubuntu philosophy, which includes the one small town and includes all the lessons that we've learned in 15 years of what not to do and what was most likely going to be the quickest route to changing the world and creating a new alternative to the current socio-economic structure. This outcome of this presentation should be very simple. First of all, learn and know why the world is so messed up. Figure out why nothing works and why things just seem to be falling apart around us. We'll figure this out as we go through this presentation. We'll discover the role of money in everything. We'll discover how to get out of the situation and actually find a simple solution for the way forward. So Ubuntu and contributionism has been around since 2005. It's really a philosophy that came out of the research that I was doing in 2005 while studying the origins of humankind, when I stumbled upon what I then realized was the true origins of money. And we'll go through this in great detail because most people alive today have no idea what money is, where it comes from, how it was created, and why we actually use it. So the Ubuntu movement has been around since about 2010 or 2009, and since then it's grown into a global movement of people and supporters and followers and people that get very excited about this very simple philosophy in more than 140 countries. And that's quite amazing. What that does, it shows me that people everywhere, no matter what country you live, are looking for a solution, looking for a better world, looking for a better life for themselves and their families. I'd like to remind you that we live in a world of abundance. We don't live in a world of scarcity. Unfortunately, this is what's being painted for us. And we're constantly told that things are scarce, that there's not enough of this and not enough of that. A world of abundance is what surrounds us. We just need to figure out how to set up this world around us that we can tap into this abundance, whether it's food, whether it's technology, whether it's energy, whether it's healthcare. The abundance around us is unbelievable, and we'll learn all about this during this presentation as well. Just think about it. Every day, about 7.5 or 8 billion people wake up and they do something. We do so much every day that boggles our mind. If you just think about what we do, how we build, we grow food, we transport, we carry, we create, we invent, we dream, we paint, we sculpture, we sing, we cook, we dance, we fly. We do an infinite number of things every day, 7.5 billion people. And yet at the end of that day, most of us cannot afford what it is that we've created. We just don't have enough money to buy the cars that we build or the airplanes that we build or the food that we grow because we keep doing this for corporations or government departments or somebody else. We should be doing it for ourselves, but we ultimately end up doing it for a third party, and we do not have access to the things that we create. The technology that surrounds us is all created by people, not by corporations. Keep this in mind. And we are moving towards a structure and a social system where everyone alive will have access to all the things that we do every day, whether it's the food we grow, the technology we create, or the cures for cancer and all other diseases that we're capable of delivering. It is truly spectacular to realize that in this world of abundance, there is more starvation today than ever before in the history of our planet. More people today die on a daily basis from starvation than ever before. Now, personally, I don't want to live in a world like this. And I know that if you're watching this video, you already fall into the category of people that don't want to live in a world like this. I believe that nobody wants to live in a world of this scarcity and this misery and this poverty and this hunger that grips the world on so many levels. It is also deeply depressing to know that about 1/3 of the food that we grow gets discarded every year. According to the United Nations, about 1.3 to 2 billion tons of food gets discarded every year. Not because there are no people that want to eat the food. We clearly know there are hungry people everywhere. But the food gets discarded because there's no one to buy it. People don't have enough money to buy the food. And this is the kind of world that I want to certainly get out of as quickly as possible. We live in an insane world. And if you're getting a little depressed at this stage, I want to remind you, don't get caught up in this. We're just setting the scene for what the world looks like today and how we're going to get out of this. This is just a reminder of how bad things really are, so we don't keep making excuses for the horrible scenarios around us and the horrible truth and the reality around us. We stop making excuses for it and actually start coming up with solutions. That's what this is all about. So a final reminder of how insane the world is. There's more homeless people today than ever before in the world. More sick people today than ever before. More mentally disturbed people today. More children dying every day than ever before. And not just from accidental diseases. Now it just so happens that they're actually children dying from imposed diseases, from vaccines and other so-called cures that are forced on humanity all over the world. People denied treatment in hospitals. This happens every day. People arrive in hospitals and are denied treatment. This is an unimaginable situation if the countries truly belonged to the people and the governments were the servants of the people. This clearly wouldn't be happening. There's more crime than ever before today. More displacement. More people are being displaced from their countries of birth and countries of origin because of warfare, of strife and conflict, that are escaping to greener pastures and only finding themselves in situations of slavery where they're being exploited and they cannot get out of that. This is a dramatically and a desperate situation that we need to overturn, and we will overturn this. We know how to do this, and you will find out how to do this. And finally, more debt than ever before. There is now more debt among the people of the world than has ever existed before. And you've got to ask yourself, how have we come to this situation? Clearly, something is completely and utterly wrong with the world that we live in today. And it's at this stage that I have to ask, and I've been asking this question for 15 years as I've traveled through more than 30 countries around the world, done hundreds of presentations to thousands and thousands of people around the world about Ubuntu and contributionism. Contributionism being the philosophy of that really is the manifestation of the Ubuntu philosophy into a new social structure. I've asked the following question, and what I can tell you is not one person has ever put up their hand. And the question is very simple. How many of us are happy with the way the world is going? How many of us are happy with what the governments are doing and how they're using the resources and the taxes that we pay? How many of us are happy with the way the world is going? Nobody is happy. If you think you're happy with it, then you potentially just slightly delusional at the moment because you might have just gotten a raise, or you got a new car, or you got a new house, or something happened that maybe lifted your spirit. But if you take a step back and you look around you at what's truly going on in the world, this is not the kind of world that I want to live in, and I believe that nobody wants to live in this kind of world. I've certainly had this experience with thousands and thousands of people in more than 30 countries around the world. So the current situation is very simple to really deduce what's going on. Every social political system that we've had has failed us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this discussion. You wouldn't be watching this video because you'd be living very happily, having a beautiful, blissful life full of prosperity and abundance. You wouldn't be worrying about your future and your children's future. Every social political system we've had has failed us. People everywhere live in misery. There seems to be no happy outcome to the political and the economic mess of this planet. And this, I think, is potentially the biggest problem, that people feel trapped. They cannot see a way out of this mess. Every year, every month, every day, every week, it gets more difficult and harder to survive. People are having to do 2 or 3 jobs just to survive and pay the bills and put bread on the table every day. More poverty, more hunger, more homelessness. Everybody wants a better life. Very few know what to do, and this is where we find the solutions and present a very simple way forward. Our global system is broken. The global economic system and social structures are broken. It is out of control. Clearly, everybody can feel that. It cannot be fixed. This is very important for everybody to digest and just become comfortable with, because as soon as we become comfortable with it and we know that we cannot fix this problem, we will be able to start on a journey of a new discovery and developing a new system. So we have to find a new system, a system in which money is no longer needed. And we will go into this in great detail. The reason I say this is because I don't want people to think up front that we're creating this and we're going to carry on promoting the current structure. It doesn't work. They say that the youth shall inherit the world. Well, unfortunately, unless the young people wake up and do something about their future, they're going to inherit a very miserable world. A world of slavery where all the young people are enslaved by the banks before they even leave high school. College students that are enslaved in debt for the rest of their lives under the promises of getting an education that will give them a good life. Millions of students around the world are already trapped in that student debt. So my suggestion to you, before you take out a student loan or you think you're going to improve your life by taking out a loan, think very, very hard about your next move. This is all just a trap by the global banking elite to suck more and more people into the global debt scenario. So solving our problems is very easy, much easier than most people realize, as I've said before. But as Albert Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same kind of thinking we used when we created the problems. Clearly, we have to use a different kind of thinking, and this is where it starts to get very, very exciting. We have to come up with a brand new kind of strategy, a brand new idea that gives everybody not only hope, but is very clear in the outcomes and the final destination. And that's exactly what the contributionism philosophy and the one small town philosophy provides. So for those that are new to the Ubuntu movement and you say, what is this weird word, Ubuntu, what's it all about? Well, Ubuntu is just a simple word. It's not Ubuntu or Ubuntu, or it's just Ubuntu. Very simple, like you see it written, right? And it's an ancient African philosophy that literally just means unity within community. Unity and cooperation, working together for the benefit of the whole community, using our unique individual skills for the benefit of everyone in the community. So it doesn't just benefit some and excludes others. That's not a solution. That just creates more potential for violence and conflict. Being loved and honored as individuals for our skills and our contributions to our community. That's what Ubuntu is all about. It's I am who I am because of who we all are. That is actually probably the best definition of the deeper philosophy and the spiritual context of the word Ubuntu. So what is contributionism? Well, contributionism is just really a new social structure that is based on these inclusive, loving principles of Ubuntu. Contributionism is like no other ism that's ever existed. And if people think it's like communism or capitalism or socialism or fascism, think again. We have never had a system in which money no longer rules or controls our lives and our world. And that's what contributionism is all about. The meaning of the word is actually in the word itself, contribute. It's a system into which everybody contributes their natural talents or their acquired skills for the benefit of the whole community. It's really that simple. And you'll see as we go through this, how simple it is and how simple the solutions are. The moment we implement this very simple philosophy of contributionism, where you contribute what you're passionate about and what you're good at. Now, it's very interesting that over the years, since 2005, when I first started wrestling with this idea, what happens if we remove money from the system? What will happen? And I suddenly started to realize that everything suddenly gets a lot easier because you're removing the hurdles to progress. But then the million questions come up. Well, how is this going to work? How is that going to work? How is this going to work if there's no money? And you'll find out how it works as we go through this. It is, once again, a lot simpler than we first imagined. What happened since 2005, there have been these 5 points, what I call the 5-point mantra of contributionism, that has evolved and that has pretty much remained the same. Every now and then something seems really important and we add it to it only to remove it later. So the 5-point contributionism mantra has remained since 2005, and this is what it is, as simple as this: no money, no barter, no trading, no value attached to anything, because every one of our contributions should be equally valuable. That's when we realize how beautiful the world is and how we can really share and contribute to each other's greater benefit. And finally, where everyone contributes their talents and skills for the benefit of everybody else in their community, not just for themselves. So 5 points: no money, no barter, no trade, no value attached, where everyone contributes their talents and skills for the greater benefit of everyone in their community. One of the greatest statements about slavery was made by Johann Wolfgang Goethe, famous Austrian poet, author, philosopher. And he made this cutting statement that says, "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free." And the emphasis here is on the word falsely believe, because there are many people in the world that still think that they have certain kind of freedom. And unfortunately, that is not true. It's only when you realize that every aspect of your life is being controlled, manipulated, restricted by laws, bills, acts, courts, judges, government departments, and even the Bill of Rights, you'll find, is an absolute assault on our rights, where we believe it's actually a Bill of Rights, of human rights. You will learn that that is not actually the case. So remember, from the first breath you take to the last moment you breathe out, our lives are controlled by those who control money. And that is something we're going to figure out how to get out of and how to escape that very, very simply. So we're not born free. Let me remind you this. We cannot move around freely. We cannot live where we choose to. We need passports and work permits. We have to follow rules and laws that we didn't agree to at birth. There are all kinds of laws and things that we didn't agree to, and yet they shove down our throats. And if you don't abide by these laws, you break these laws that you didn't agree to, and you end up in jail. So that is not freedom. I hope you've realized this by now. We have to work to survive and earn this thing called money. We're the only species that has to pay money to live in the world that we're born into. We have to pay taxes to escape jail. This is not freedom. Clearly, this is called slavery. We're enslaved by money and the socio-economic structure and the socio-economic system that we're all born into. In the movie The Matrix, Morpheus describes what the Matrix is. And in essence, that's what he's describing. He's describing the global slavery system that's driven by the banking elite, the royal political elite that control the money and so forth, and possibly some hidden faces behind those that control the bankers. So Morpheus on the slavery system has this to say: the Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people that we're trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. I don't necessarily agree with the fact that that makes them our enemy. We're going to get over that. But you have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inured, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. That is a beautiful description of what happens in the world today. You will find that as you start talking about this contributionism philosophy and changing, making the world a better place and creating new communities, you'll find that some people get it and they really want to come on board immediately, and others will just fight it. They just believe that it's not possible. They believe that we're trapped in the system forever, and unfortunately that brings with it a philosophy and a strategy or a culture of violence, opposition and conflict. And that is the thing that we need to escape. As long as we keep propagating and promoting this culture of violence, opposition and conflict, we're not going to get anywhere. We constantly keep regurgitating what we've done in the past. So what is money? Money is just a tool of control. It's really important for everybody to Just digest this and realize it. The sooner we realize it, the easier it is going to be for us to get out of the system. Money is the tool by which we are enslaved until we come to terms with the truth about money, what money is, where it comes from, how it was created. We'll forever remain the subjects of those who control the creation and the supply of money. This is a very important, probably the most fundamental aspect of the Ubuntu and contributionist movement, for people to learn this very simple fact and realize that as soon as we get to a stage where we no longer need money, everything will change so quickly that we won't even remember what the world was like when money ruled the world. This is what Bob Marley has to say about money in one of his songs. It's a beautiful line, just to bring a bit of light relief here. Money is numbers, and numbers never end. If it takes money to be happy, your search for happiness will never end. Bob Marley. So let's quickly talk about money and break this down. What is money? Where does it come from? And the origins of money, which most people have no clue about what money is and how it evolved, how it got to where it is today. Most people are of the opinion that money somehow evolved over thousands of years through bartering and trading and then gold coins. And I know the story that I was told at school, and you were probably told the same story. And that story is false. That story was created as a propaganda tool to support and make us believe that money is critical and necessary and has evolved and lived with humanity for thousands and thousands of years. The sooner we dispel that, the sooner and easier it will be to get out of it. So the origins of money, first we find in the Sumerian texts. The Sumerian writings on the clay tablet and the Sumerian clay tablets, millions of clay tablets have been discovered, hundreds of thousands translated. We learn about some of the very earliest activities of humankind, 6,000 years BC and 5,000 and 4,000 years BC in Sumeria, in what is now Iraq, some of the oldest civilizations in that fertile crescent, as it's often referred to, between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, all the stories of the biblical lands. That is where the Sumerian civilization rose some 6,000 years BC already, and they left behind millions of clay tablets with information on it. Well, among these clay tablets are a group of tablets known as the King's Lists. These King Lists mentioned a number of kings that ruled for thousands and thousands of years. In fact, more than 240,000 years of rulers and kings that ruled the world. That's how far back the Sumerian Kings Lists actually take humanity and humankind. And that's a subject for another discussion that you can get on my other websites and channels. But among these Sumerian texts, we find these Kings Lists, and we learn from these that there was a time when kingdom was lowered to earth from heaven. And suddenly we find the appearance of the first royal bloodlines, the first priest kings that appear out of the blue. The Sumerian texts tell us that these first kings were appointed by the gods. Now, what you do with that information is up to you. Again, that is for another discussion. But this is the moment where we suddenly discover the appearance out of the blue of the royal bloodlines and the first kings on earth. These kings suddenly owned all the land. They had knowledge of writing. They had fierce weapons with which to smite and kill people if the people didn't want to listen to them. So clearly they became very powerful individuals, and people feared them and they obeyed them and they listened to them. And this is why they remained the kings and created the bloodlines that then filtered through the thousands of years, where we still have the royal bloodlines running and ruling the world today. One of the first things these first priest kings did some 6,000 years ago, or possibly further back in time, is they built their temples. And these temples were also the first banks, because it's in these temples that they started to write and issue the first forms of money. And these forms of money were issued on clay tablets. There were little clay tablets that were actually the original promissory notes. Just like the pieces of paper in your wallet today is a promise to pay, but it doesn't say that anymore because our money has become fiat currency, right? It's just a piece of paper. It really has no value. The only reason it has value because we keep using it. The original structure and form of the original money was clay tablets, and nothing has changed in 6,000 years. This is the most incredible thing. Nothing has changed. These promissory notes that were once written on clay remain to be written on pieces of paper in the banking industry today. The entire banking industry today is just really working with what is referred to as negotiable instruments. And negotiable instruments are made up of bills of exchange, promissory notes, and checks. And that's what banks work with on their side of the counter. On our side of the counter, on the public side of the counter, we call it money, right? So keep in mind, and this is just, it's such a shenanigans going on in the banking industry, and just smoke and mirrors and making it so complicated that most people don't understand what's going on. It's very, very simple. So what's very obvious, now that we know the origins of money, and it suddenly appeared out of the blue as a fully evolved, fully planned and perfected system. It's not something that evolved. It was introduced to humanity and is still used exactly the same way as it was in its origins. So it's very obvious that money was maliciously introduced to the human race as a tool of enslavement. Money did not evolve out of thousands of years of bartering and trading. If your teachers or your professors are still trying to shove that down your throat, please ignore it. Tell them they don't know what they're talking about and they should watch this video to enlighten and educate themselves. Many of us have seen the movie The Truman Show. It's actually a great example of how easily we can be controlled and manipulated to believing something that is not necessarily true. Truman, as you may or may not know, is a baby that is born into a TV show. And everything around him is created and fake and synthetic just for him so they can have a TV show. And when they asked the producer of The Truman Show, why does Truman simply accept this fake reality around him? How come he doesn't realize that he's being controlled and manipulated on every level? The producer answers, we accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. And just think about it. That's exactly what happens to us. We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. From the first moments that we have as our consciousness starts to grow as little babies, and then children running around, toddlers, all the things that we see, whether it's petrol and cars and money and having to buy stuff, and how our parents are stressing and struggling to survive. This is the reality. So we grow up with the concept of money, that money is always there, money rules the world, and life is hard, and that it's going to be very tough to survive. And most of the people in the world grow up with this philosophy. So if you suggest to somebody that we don't need money, or that we're going to take money out of the system, it is an impossible scenario. To most people, they can't imagine that. And we're going to dispel that. We're going to get rid of that notion, because that is the most unnatural notion that we should carry with us as living, breathing, conscious human beings. So let's look at our reality, right? Our reality, like Truman, is as follows. We are born, we go to school, the harder you work, the more you get. That's what we're told all the time, right? We find a career and suppress our talents. Remember how many times children tell their teachers or their parents, yes, I want to do this. And the parents or the teachers say, well, that's great, but how are you going to survive doing that? So everything is constantly skewed back towards money and making money so that you can survive. And we're told that competition is good. Competition is the mother of invention. Without competition, there'd be nothing. That's probably one of the most disgusting lies that we've been fed. And unfortunately, this is internalized in our subconscious. And we keep thinking that's one of the fear factors that keeps driving us, that we have to constantly compete and be better and get to the top of the pile. What happens when you get to the top of the pile? Somebody else wants to get to the top of the pile and knock you off your perch. So clearly that's not going to work, right? We believe in all-powerful governments and their control. Got all our lives as we're growing up, we see the governments, the control. We are told that we appoint and elect our governments to be our servants, but you know by now that that's not true. The governments are not our servants. But a lot more about that. We have borders, we have passports. You can't just go from one place to another. We have laws. We become citizens at a moment, at some stage of our lives. You're a baby, then a toddler, then a child, and then suddenly you're a citizen, and now suddenly you're the possession. Somebody owns you. Your country and your government owns you, and they can do whatever they want with you. If you want to learn a lot more about it, I suggest you read the Ubuntu book, where it goes into a lot of great detail about this. And we get told over and over, don't trust anyone. Don't trust anyone. What kind of a world is this where you go around constantly fearing and not trusting anyone? I don't want to live in a world like that. Survival of the fittest. Yeah, you have to be fit. You have to be survival of the fittest. This is what's shoved down our throats. That is not necessarily true. That is, in fact, completely the opposite. Even when you start looking at genetics, that is not true. And those people that work in the genetics field and still believe in that need to go and re-examine some of their fundamental basic knowledge. Money makes the world go round. That's what we are told. Money makes the world go round. Well, the last time I looked, the world is going around all on its own, and it doesn't really need money to do that. Keep that in mind. Very powerful argument against that. And then we work all our lives, we retire, and we die. And that's life. Right? So let's change that. And you'll see how simple it is to change it once we rethink what's going on, recognize what's going on, see the problems, and identify the very simple solutions. We can make changes very, very quickly. We're told that the only way is competition and democracy. If you don't subscribe to democracy, then you're a communist, or you're a socialist, or you're an evil person because you want to destroy the social structure of the world, the thing that keeps everything stable. And competition is the thing that keeps everything moving forward. So we need to get over this. Competition is not good. In fact, competition is the thing that drives war and conflict on every level. Competition destroys lives, it destroys families, it creates control and scarcity, it drives division and conflict on every possible level. Whether it's from the school you go to, or the university you go to, or the car you drive, or the jeans you wear, or the sneakers you wear, or the credit card you have, or what a country you live in, competition is the thing that keeps creating division and control. Divide and conquer. That's really the fundamental principle of driving this competition down our throats. All you got to do is look to see how bad competition is and what it's done to a country is look at the United States today. How divided the people of the United States have become because of their politics. Two parties that are arguing and fighting each other, literally dividing the country in half, making people detest each other because of a party they believe in, or that party or this party. Clearly, this competition and this democracy is not a solution. It is an absolutely brilliant, manipulative, conniving, beautifully calculated tool of control that was injected into our lives. And unfortunately, we're the schmucks that believe this is a solution. We have a much easier and a simpler solution that we share in the Ubuntu and Contributionist movement. The only way forward is cooperation and collaboration, not competition. Through cooperation and collaboration, everything becomes possible. Everything becomes achievable on every possible level. Abundance, peace, prosperity, all the things that we want and strive for and dream of as living, breathing human beings. Out of unity comes infinite diversity and abundance. This is such a beautiful and simple statement that I'd like you to think about this for a little while. Only out of unity comes infinite abundance and prosperity. And one of the best and most obvious examples of this unity within community and creating abundance and prosperity out of this unity are our own bodies. All you got to do is look at your body and what happens inside your body. Trillions of cells working together to keep your body healthy. Trillions of cells cooperating, working together, not fighting each other. What happens when the cells in your body start fighting each other? You get sick and die. And it's really interesting. Even when the cells in our bodies gang up into clusters of cells, like your brain cells or your heart cells or your blood cells or your liver cells or your skin cells, all the different thousands of organs and parts of our bodies, even when the cells specialize and become part of a group of cells, they still don't fight each other. They know that they have to perform a very specific function as a group of specialized cells to support and feed the rest of the body, the rest of the community of cells that make up the whole body. So there is a very simple and a beautiful example of what we should be doing as the human race, what we should be doing with our communities, working together, cooperating. No matter how diverse or specialized we may be, whatever we do must serve the greater good of the whole community of people in our community. Sharing spirit, human nature. You know, if you come down for breakfast in the morning and you're sitting there and your wife's in the kitchen and your daughter is there having some orange juice and your son comes down, you know, this is now the perfect family of 4, right? So you come down for breakfast and your wife's making you eggs and scrambled eggs, or you're making your wife scrambled eggs, all depends what kind of family you live in. And your daughter grabs some food and this and that. At which point do you stop and say to your wife, like, listen, honey, you owe me $5 for the eggs, and daughter, what did you have? Do you have orange juice and cornflakes? Okay, that'll be $6. And we don't do that, do we? So in our families, we seem to share, having a loving and a sharing spirit. We don't imagine that we're going to charge ourselves for the things that we use and consume and build as a family unit. And even if you expand that to a friendship, a community unit, you go to the pub on a Friday night, you meet some people, you get on, you have a good vibe, you invite them to a barbecue or a braai, as we call it here, to your house, and they arrive on Saturday and everyone's there having a good time. At which point do you say, look, you owe me $10 for the meat and another $20 for the beer? You don't do that. You've invited somebody to your house. You open your home to complete strangers. That is the true and beautiful example of how giving we are as a species and how we like to share. Not only share our abundance, and sometimes share even in times where you don't have anything. My experience traveling around the world, the poorer the country and the poorer the people, the more sharing they are. In fact, if you get stuck in Africa or India and some of the so-called third world countries, and you run out of fuel or food, or you don't have a place to stay for the night, the people that live in the huts and the little shacks will give you a bed for the night, and they'll feed you and they'll give you a blanket while they have nothing, because they'll take care of you as a traveler. That's not going to happen in New York City or in the big cities of the world if you don't have a place to sleep at night. So it just shows you that the loving and giving spirit of people is indelible. You cannot get rid of that. And this is what we're striving back to bring back into our societies and our communities. So treat your community as your family and treat the world as your community. And suddenly you realize how simple things are. Everyone becomes your family. The moment we do this, there are no more strangers, no more enemies, no more weird people over there. Suddenly everyone around the world becomes your family. And to some people that think this is unachievable, unattainable, well, I have news for you. This is very achievable and very attainable. And in fact, this is the unquestionable, undeniable side effect of creating a contributionist community. And it will happen as soon as we get to that point of launching the first One Small Town. So just to remind you, one of the biggest problems and the hurdles we have to overcome is this division, because we are a deeply divided species. This is not by accident, this is by design, and by now everybody should know this. Our division is not an accidental division. The borders of the countries, the religions that create so much division and hatred and violence, this is not by accident. The division is a calculated and implemented division by those that call themselves our leaders, whether they're political or religious leaders. This has been going on for thousands of years. Every day we face millions of problems, and we are told by our governments and our leaders that it's complicated, it's not easy, and that they're trying their best to find solutions. Well, by now you should know that that's not true either, because often the solutions that we can see very clearly, we can solve in a flash. Our governments and our authorities seem impossible or seem incapable of solving some of these very simple solutions. So the solutions are simple. Our farmers, our scientists, our engineers, mothers and children, they know how to solve the problems. Politicians do not solve problems. Politicians are there to keep the problems going, because that's how they keep control over the people. So The system of contributionism is how we change and extricate ourselves of all this mess, this whole misery. It's so simple that I actually call it a self-correcting system. We cannot screw it up. The solutions come from within the community, always for the best outcome of everyone in the community, and not just a few individuals, corporations or bankers. It's a self-correcting system that always corrects itself for the best outcome of everyone in the community. And that has been for the past 15 years, since 2005. This very simple vision that I had at that time made me realize how simple and elegant this solution is. Unfortunately, money has become a holy cow. As we mentioned already, most people can't imagine a world in which money does not control our lives. Most people think we need money, and we defend it. We defend money, and we glorify the system that enslaves us. Like Morpheus says, that we will fight to protect the system, the same system that is turning us into its slave. We have corporations and careers and brands. We have jobs. Keep in mind that the word job means slave. Job means that someone else is controlling you and manipulating you. And if they no longer need you, they kick you out. You lose your job. You're back on the street. You cannot pay your bond. You cannot pay your rent. You cannot pay your hospital bills. You cannot pay your car. Suddenly, you don't have a job. You can no longer survive in this insane world of ours. We have corporations that control our countries. This is just spectacular. Corporations have more rights than living, breathing human beings. And then obviously the banking families that control the corporations. They sit at the top of the pile. They control the corporations, that control our governments, control our countries. In essence, we can say that banks have stolen our countries. Think about it. If you don't pay your car, who repossesses your car? The banks. If you don't pay your home, who takes your home back? The bank. If you don't pay your factory, who takes your factory back? The bank. If you don't pay your farm, who takes your farm back? The bank. The banks and to the banking families have taken control and stolen the countries from its people. Central banks and the global control is quite spectacular. The banking families, in essence, can be described as the largest organized crime syndicate in the world. Some people struggle with this concept because we're so used to seeing as gangsters and Al Capone and the Russian mafia and the whatever mafia and this and Pablo Escobar and the drug lords and all this. We can't think for a second that the bankers are the guys that are actually the largest organized crime syndicate in the world. They've just set themselves up so that they operate outside of the law, above the law, and they control the law. And this is how they manipulate and control everything. The banking families are very well and easily recognized. I don't have to tell you who they are. You can go and look for yourself. Since fortunately we have the internet and you can find answers to questions very quickly these days, although some of the answers to some of the questions are becoming more and more hidden, as some of you may have realized. The banking families that control the world are, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Morgans and Carnegies, the Schiffs, the Harrimans, the Warburgs, the Vanderbilts, and several other global banking families that pretty much run the world. They own all the central banks. They control the supply of money in the world. They control the making and the supply of money. This is the key thing. Not how much money you have. That's irrelevant. They can have as much money as they want. It's really an entry in a computer. It's the control and the supply of money that is what gives them so much power. The central banks control all the governments of the world. And if you don't know this yet, you're going to find out right now. They own the World Bank, they own the European Central Bank, the IMF or International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, the United Nations. Most of us think the United Nations is this amazing. No. It's set up, paid for, and controlled by the bankers. And then obviously all the central banks of the world. Every central bank of every country is controlled and owned by the global banking families, the royal political elite. The Federal Reserve Bank of the USA is obviously the largest. The Bank of England is the mother of them all. That's where it all started, and really the control. The South African Reserve Bank is probably one of the wealthiest ones, and this is why the Rothschilds stranglehold on South Africa is so strong, because of the minerals here. The Reserve Bank of Australia, the Bank of India, Central Bank of Brazil. These are just some examples. Every central bank of every country is owned and controlled by the banking families that run the world. And it's from the central banks that they then give instructions to all the other banks, like the Bank of America or Barclays Bank or whatever bank it is that you go and work with as an individual. Those are the banks that are controlled by the central bank in every country. And the central banks, in turn, then are controlled by a business called the Bank for International Settlements, which sits in Basel, Switzerland. And this is why Switzerland always remains a neutral country, never involved in any wars, and where all the tyranny is spread into the world through the BIS, or the Bank for International Settlements. So the instructions go from there to all the central banks of the world, and they then control the banks within their respective countries. There is an incredible interview that was done sometime in the 80s or early 90s with Alan Greenspan, where he's asked by one of the American journalists that asked him, so what is the relationship like between the Fed and the American president? And he answers, the relationship is very good, has always been very good with all the American presidents. But then he goes to explain, keep in mind that the Fed is an independent organization, an independent institution that operates outside of the Constitution and the jurisdiction of the United States. This is really important for people to comprehend and sink in. You cannot sue the Reserve Bank or the Federal Bank. You cannot take them to court. You cannot sue them. They cannot go to jail. They are untouchable because they operate outside of the Constitution of our countries. This is a shock to the system. I certainly know when I discovered this, you realize very quickly why the bankers keep getting away with all the crimes that they're committing and that they're responsible for. The other important thing that most people are still unaware of, that banks don't have anything. They don't have wealth or anything. They keep stealing it and shuffling the pieces on or the deck chairs on the Titanic or the chess pieces. They don't have anything. They just have the right to control. And through this right and with this right, they create money out of thin air. You would have probably heard this expression some time before, several times. Banks create money out of thin air, and that's exactly true. They will give you all kinds of complicated red tape and bureaucratic answers about how money is created. It's all absolute nonsense and rubbish. It's just a simple entry into a computer. That's ultimately what it comes down to. They've created this very complex banking and financial system around us that is so complicated and so full of red tape and control that the average person on the street thinks, oh, this is for the clever people. Only a few people understand this. And they want it to look like that from the outside, because ultimately, if people knew what was really going on in the banking system and how it operated, there'd be a riot overnight. And I'm not the first guy to say that, as you'll find out. So think about the fact that banks bail out countries. This is an insane statement or an insane thought. If a bank can bail out a country, then clearly the bank is the highest authority in that country and not the government. Surely most people think that the banks belong to the country and to the people, and the government is there to control and manage the bank and manage the central bank on behalf of the people. Well, now you know that that's not the case. And this is why the central banks that run and control the governments can bail out a country. And the moment they do that, they put the entire country into even more debt than that country was before. And now we get to politics. How does money and banking affect politics? Because we appoint our governments to serve us, to be our servants, not to tell us what to do. And yet that's exactly what's going on, right? People jump up and down, they protest, they want this, they need this. All the things that we need as people are never provided by our governments. It's always the opposite, because it comes from the top, from the banking families that keep turning the screws tighter and tighter to make life more and more difficult. Most of us have forgotten this very simple fact that the governments should be the servants of the people. Just remind yourself and remind your children of this. The government is not your friend. The government is not your servant. The government works and serves for the banking families. And this is why the bankers control and manipulate all the presidents, the leaders, the prime ministers, because that's how they keep the control over every country. Our governments borrow money from private companies called central banks. And this is why we have tax, VAT, levies, charges. If we had controlled our own bank and we had a people's bank, why would we charge ourselves interest? It's an insane, nonsensical idea. And in fact, there are some very prominent examples of several countries that have had people's banks in the past that were incredibly successful. But we all know what happened to those. There was no strife, there was prosperity and abundance on all levels. All those countries were invaded or changed by the banking empire, so that abundance disappears very quickly. Otherwise, people all over the world will start to implement these very simple solutions. Just to remind you, the banking families are the largest organized crime syndicate in the world. If you still doubt this, there's a great book that you can look at, The Confessions of the Economic Hitman by John Perkins, that tells us how the bankers invade countries, how they topple governments and pretty much take control of countries right under the noses of the people. There's an expression that many people are aware of, that is, all wars are bankers' wars. And if this is new to you, you will realize that throughout thousands of years, going back to Rome and further back, all the war, even to those first priest kings that we've already covered, they controlled the wars because they controlled the banks, they controlled the money, the issuing of money, they controlled the wars. They set up two different sides to fight each other because that keeps the control of divide and conquer in place, and it keeps them funding and operating. And the money, war is a very hungry beast. It needs huge amounts of money. So wars are often and repetitively created by the global banking royal political elite to keep the world in turmoil and keep the money machine going. So this is a very important thing. People don't want to fight each other. Why do I want to go and fight some guy over there who's a farmer who's living happily with his family? I've got no desire to do that. It's governments that start wars. Governments that send their young men into war. People don't want to go fight. Governments and through the bankers create these enemies all over the world and then utilize and sacrifice the young people to go and fight in a false war, fighting an invisible enemy. And this is one of the biggest crimes that's ever been committed against humanity and the youth of the world. The young men mostly that go there and for pride and country to go and defeat some demonic enemy that is actually a bunch of farmers and people that just want to live a happy life. So until the year 2000, there were a number of countries that did not have the Rothschild Bank, like Cuba, Iran, Libya, Iraq, North Korea, Sudan, Afghanistan, Syria. I think you can see the agenda here, right? Since the invasion of those countries, all their central banks have been taken over, and there's now a handful of maybe 4 countries in the world that do not have a central Rothschild-controlled bank in their country. The historic resistance to money goes back thousands of years. This is not something that just happened in the 60s or 50s or whatever. It goes back thousands of years. The most recent one, obviously the biggest one, was Occupy Wall Street. Although there seems to be a hidden agenda behind it, Occupy Wall Street was a clear indication that people are unhappy with the banking system, with the financial system, with how money is used, and the poverty and the lack of abundance that we find ourselves in. Julius Caesar, as far back as 48 BC, was one of the more prominent global leaders that stood up against the bankers. And we all know what happened to him, right? Yeah, this is what happens. They kill anyone that opposes them. They kill, maim, torture, kidnap. It's just, they have blood on their hands on levels that we cannot even begin to imagine. genocides, wars, millions of people killed by the bankers in the name of control and monetary global slavery. Julius Caesar took back from the money changers the power to coin money and minted coins for the benefit of all. With his new plentiful supply of money, he established many massive constructions, projects, and built great public works, and made Rome a very prosperous place for all its people. Well, that did not go down well with the bankers, and they got rid of him. An interesting thing happened in 1225 AD, where the charging of interest was deemed to be wrong because it applied to double charging. This is St. Thomas Aquinas in 1225. So this is the church actually standing up against the charging of interest. This is absolutely unbelievable. In fact, the church law in the Middle Ages in Europe forbade the charging of interest on loans and even made it a crime which they called usury. Well, guess what? Today, usury is part of our monetary system. And we pay usury tax whether you're aware of it or not. So what was once a crime in the Middle Ages is now day-to-day operating practice by the global banking scam artists, criminals. Jesus or Jeshua or Issa, whatever you want to call this amazing individual, probably one of the only times in his life, if you do believe this or not, one of the only times in his life that he became violent was against the bankers in the temple, when the money changers and the bankers were there extorting the people. One of the greatest statements against the bankers comes from Thomas Jefferson. I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and the corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. And that's exactly what has happened. The banks confiscate everything. First, they confiscate the homelands of the native people. Then they confiscate the farms, they confiscate the factories, and they just take everything. It's very interesting that in 1963, JFK was assassinated shortly after he implemented what I believe was an attempted coup against the central bank, the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. Keep in mind that when JFK was around, there was no internet, there was no mass media. He couldn't share his knowledge and information with the people without the risk of being silenced literally immediately. Also keep in mind that all the radios, the TVs, the newspapers and the media was already controlled by the bankers in 1960 and 63. So whatever he wanted to share with the people would have had to be filtered by the banking family's filter mechanism called the media. And 7 days before he died, he had this to say: "There is a plot in the country to enslave every man, woman and child. Before I leave this high and noble office, I intend to expose this plot." And 7 days later, he was shot in Dallas. Why was he shot? Because on the 4th of June, 1963, John F. Kennedy wrote and signed Executive Order 11110, which ordered the U.S. Treasury to issue a new public currency called the United States Note. You can see evidence of this here also in the Ubuntu book. 6 months later, he was assassinated in Dallas. What in essence happened, without telling the American people, because there was no medium through which he could tell the American people what he was doing, he just took the control back from the Fed to print the money. And the Fed was left out. It was an absolute coup, an attempt by an American president to take control of the Central Bank of America. Clearly, we know what the result was. And basically, within days or weeks of him being assassinated, the Fed started printing the money again. We had a very similar situation in South Africa, just 3 years after JFK was assassinated by the Rothschild banking empire, their thugs and their assassins. South African Prime Minister Hendrik Verwoerd who was at that time the leader of the country. He's also often referred to as the architect of apartheid, which, by the way, is not true. The British were the architects of apartheid in 1919 here in South Africa. He just used that structure to do certain things. But let's get back to the money. In 1966, Hendrik Verwoerd was assassinated in Parliament in South Africa. The blood, they stuck a knife in his heart. It was clearly some sort of a mind control program. And this was simply 3 years after JFK. Well, why was Hendrik Verwoerd assassinated? Because to those that have done their research on this, it is very clear that Hendrik Verwoerd was about to shut down and close the South African Reserve Bank and replace it with a People's Bank. For several years leading up to that, he was vocal and very interested and curious about how the global monetary system worked and who was actually in control of what. And obviously the Rothschilds and their banking thugs realized what was going on, and they realized that at that point, what many people are unaware of, in 1966, South Africa was deemed to be, by magazines like Time and Newsweek, South Africa was the most prosperous country in the world. So, can you imagine if the leader of the most prosperous country in the world shut down the central bank and kept the Rothschild and global thugs out? That would not have been good. It literally would have taken South Africa and become the most powerful country in the world overnight, with all the minerals, the wealth, the gold, the diamonds, the platinum, everything else we have here. This is clearly not something they could allow. So they got rid of him, and they made it to look like an apartheid crime. He was killed because of apartheid. It had nothing to do with apartheid. And once again, the banks and their thugs, the bankers and their thugs, are masters of deception, masters of brainwashing and manipulation and propaganda. Our countries are corporations. This is a big shock to the system when people realize it. Our constitutions are not written for the people. All you got to do is look at the name of your constitution. In South Africa, it says it's the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. It's not the Constitution of the people of South Africa. In the United States, it's the Constitution of the United States of America. Our constitutions are written for corporations, not for people. And the reason why this is important, because our countries are registered as corporations. Every country in the world is registered as a corporation. This is an extract from the US Securities and Exchange in Washington, D.C. And this is where all the countries are registered as corporations. You can see here the Republic of South Africa registered as a corporation. And not only that, we have the government of the Republic of South Africa, along Lehman Brothers, Anglo-American, Standard Bank of South Africa, all these corporations, and our country is also now suddenly a corporation. And this goes for all the countries. Here's a quick example of other countries, and it's not just countries, it's provinces, states, cities, highways, everything that's possible and imaginable has been incorporated. Everything in our lives, from our countries to the roads we drive on, have now become corporations and owned by corporations. And this is why when I say our constitutions are not written for the people, they're constitutions for corporations. Here's an example: the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, not the Constitution of the people. And now we know that the Republic of South Africa is a corporation. This is a very sad state of affairs. What else is there that controls us and divides us? Education. Education is one of the most brilliant manipulative tools of control. A powerful tool to take control of our young minds and prepare them for a life of servitude. That's what education has been turned into. How many of us actually use any of the stuff we get taught at school? Really? Think of this. What we need are skills for life. Skills that enhance our human adventure, our human experience. Not knowing how to calculate, or trigonometry, or calculus, or geography. I mean, all these things are important, but these things you pick up and learn as a matter of life in any case. You don't have to spend and waste 12 years of your life to learn the stuff that you never use in the rest of your life. What you realize that the education system is completely and utterly, once again, as everything else, controlled by money. Look at our schools today. Are these kind of places that that look like they're places that inspire young children or give them a hunger for life and to go and exercise their natural skills and talents that they're born with. No. Our schools are indoctrination camps. They literally look like prison camps, brainwashing our children to follow orders and bow to authority. Our education system is a perfect tool to manipulate, indoctrinate, destroys our ability to think and reason for ourselves because we have to regurgitate crap that we don't want to actually remember, and we're forced to do that, otherwise you fail. And we're told that if you're a failure, you'll never make anything in life. There's no such thing as failure. There's only life and an experience of life. And everything that you ever do is just part of the experience. It makes you a better person if you use it like that. So remember, who funds the research facilities? Who funds the education? Who funds the research facilities? The information that gets put into the textbooks that can then get distributed to the schools and universities? The bankers. The banking and the corporations funds the research facilities. And this is why we have a completely beautiful flow of the control of information from the research corporations through to the education system, the schools and universities. This is what John D. Rockefeller had to say. I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. And that's exactly that's the ideology of the banking families. The main objective of the education system today is very simply is to create a future obedient labor force. That's all it wants. And I'd like to remind you what Pink Floyd told us. We don't need your education. We don't need your mind control. Teacher, leave our kids alone. And I say this with love in my heart for the millions of teachers out there who really want to go out there and teach and educate. Unfortunately, you're trapped in a system that is created and is rotten at its core and its foundations because of how it has been evolved and created and manipulated over the last 150 years by the banking families. So let's ask ourselves a very simple question. What do people need? We need food, water, love, air, clothing, computers, furniture, knives, tables, chairs, cars, houses, fun fairs, dolls and teddy bears. We need theaters, we need music, we need millions of things. The one thing we don't need is money. Strangely enough, in any of those lists, if you really think about it, because you can't eat money, if money didn't exist, you can have all these other things without money. Money does not make the world go round. The world goes around all by itself. And the reason I say that we don't need money is because money does nothing. People do everything. We plant the seeds, we grow the food, we build the bridges and create the technology and invent the sciences and make the great inventions come to life. People do everything. Money does nothing. And every day, 7.5 billion people wake up and they do something. The amount of incredible things that we as the human race create, do, build, compose is unbelievable. Money does nothing. People do everything. Money simply prevents people from achieving their dreams and living beautiful lives. It is the hurdle to progress on every possible level. That's what money does. Suddenly bankers become the people that tell you what you can and cannot do. When you go and try and get a loan from a bank, they sit there and evaluate your skills, your abilities, and they see you might be the best baker in the world or the best architect or the best whatever in the world. Bankers will look at it and say, sorry, we're not going to give you money to follow your dreams and your passion because it is not economically viable. Not because you're not good at what you do. And this is how money and banks destroy dreams and lives and create violence and have blood on their hands. Here's a wonderful little story about the magic $100 bill. So this traveling salesman comes to town and he pulls up in front of the hotel. He goes in, he sees the manager at the front desk. He says, hi, I'm in town for a weekend and I'd love to just check out your room. I'm very particular about the kind of rooms I stay in. And would you mind if I just go up and have a look? The hotel manager says, sure, just leave $100 here as a deposit. Here's the key. Go and check out the room. Spend as much time as you want. So the traveling salesman goes upstairs, disappears, and as the hotel manager is putting the $100 bill away, he looks across the road and he sees the butcher, and he realizes, oh my goodness, I still owe the butcher $100 for the event we had here last week. So he runs out across the road into the butchery, and he says, hey, Mr. Butcher, here's the $100 I owe you for last week. The butcher says, oh, thanks very much. And as he's putting the money away in the butchery, in walks the plumber. And he looks up and he says to the butcher, hey, Mr. Butcher, do you have the $100 you owe me for fixing your pipes last week for your broken freezer? And the butcher says, oh yeah, right here, here's your $100. And he gives the $100 to the plumber. The plumber says, thanks very much. He gets in his car, drives down the road, pulls into the garage, and the garage owner says, hey, Mr. Plumber, do you have the $100 that you owe me for fixing your car last week? And he says, yeah, here it is, here's the $100. He gives the $100 to the garage owner. Garage owner jumps in his car and he's driving down the road to the shops when he sees Sally, the prostitute, walking down the street. And Sally sees him at the traffic light and says, hey, John, where's the $100 you owe me for last week? And John goes, oh, Sally, I'm so sorry, man. Here's the $100. Thanks very much. Look forward to next week. Sally is walking down the road, walks past the hotel that she normally goes with her clients. When the hotel manager sees her and says, hey, Sally, listen, where's the $100 you owe me for the room for last week? And Sally comes in, oh, sorry, man, here's the $100 I owe you for the room for last week. Thanks very much. Always wonderful to do business with you in this lovely establishment. And Sally leaves the hotel, at which point the traveling salesman comes downstairs and says to the hotel manager, thank you very much for letting me see the rooms, but it's not really up my kind of hotel. Can I have my deposit back? At which point the hotel manager says, okay, here's your $100 back. And he gives the same $100 bill back to the traveling salesman that started this journey of paying the magic debt, the imaginary, invisible magic debt that was wiped out by this traveling $100 bill that made its circuit within less than an hour and paid off all the debt. This is spectacular, because if you think about this, we could use one magical $100 bill to wipe out the debt of the entire world literally overnight. If we could just speed it up, hand it from one person to the next as quickly as possible. And that is the insanity of money and the money system. Just a quick example of that. It is not the love of money. Some people say money is just a form of exchange. It's an energy exchange. It's not, money is not evil itself. It's the love of money that is evil. It's the love of money that causes the problem. Well, I have news for you. You're completely wrong. If you think this, then you've been completely sucked into the lies and the criminality of what the money and the banking industry has become. It is not the love of money. It's the presence of money. It's because if we didn't have the money, none of this stuff would exist. So the presence of money creates all the turmoil, the drama, the suffering, the wars, the conflict, the opposition, and the sadness in the world is caused by the presence of money, not the love of money. What is the solution? Get rid of money. It's the obvious solution, because there's times in ancient times that money did not exist. When you say get rid of money, people suddenly go into shock. They go, oh my God, what do you mean? You're going to take all my money away? So I'm not going to have any money. I'm going to be poor. I won't be able to live anywhere. I'm not going to have money to buy stuff with. That's not what I suggest. That's never what was suggested by the Ubuntu movement or through the philosophy of contributionism. Getting rid of money is a process. Getting rid of money is a system where we create a world in which money is no longer needed. A world free of money, free of the stranglehold of money. And that's what this philosophy and what contributionism is all about, and provides a very simple solution into how we're going to get there and what we do. How do we do it? As Buckminster Fuller says, you cannot change things by fighting the existing reality. You have to create a system that makes the current system obsolete. And that's exactly what contributionism does. It creates a new system and a new social structure that makes the current socioeconomic system obsolete and replaced by a new system. And before people realize, There'll be a whole new world that's evolved and developed around us, which becomes our reality, a world that we never imagined. And this other reality of money and debt and banks will simply disappear from our reality. And we won't imagine how anybody could have created that reality for us in the past. So, to achieve this, we've had to learn a great deal. Since 2005, we've gone through so many different things. We've learned so much. We've gone into politics. We've done so many different things. We've protested. We've taken the banks to court. We've taken the banks to the Supreme Court, to the Constitutional Court. We have protested the banks. We've opposed them. We've done all this. I've ran for politics. The Ubuntu movement ran as a political party in South Africa, in Australia, in the UK. We've tried all these different things, thinking that we can inject a seed of consciousness into the political beast. But that was just our journey and our path and our education process. During those 12 or 13 years, we learned what not to do, what doesn't work. We realized that we cannot inject a seed of consciousness into the political beast, because the political beast is totally and utterly controlled from above. The outcomes of our elections are controlled. This I learned through running in elections in 3 different elections in South Africa in 2012, 2014 and 2016. And suddenly it became very clear. We cannot fight, we cannot oppose, we cannot resist. That achieves nothing. It gets us nowhere. What we have to do became one of the most liberating thoughts and the most brilliant, twisted forms of poetic justice that anyone could possibly ever imagine. Using the tools of enslavement as tools of liberation. And that means money itself, the greed of capitalism, the corporate structure itself, the legal systems, the laws, the courts, the judges, the police systems, the sheriffs, and politics, without actually getting into politics. That is the most sobering, brilliant, beautiful strategy that anybody could have ever imagined, using the tools of enslavement as tools of liberation. What happens when you say this to people, that we're going to remove money from the system, and we're going to do this? Thousands of questions come up. What is interesting is that all these thousands of questions can be filtered down into what I call 13 frequently asked questions. What I will do, I'll answer these 13 frequently asked questions in a separate video where we can go into each one of these, and you will realize that you already know the answers yourself. I don't even have to give you the answers. What I'd like you to do is take a look at this slide and write down these questions and try and answer them yourself. And if you're already deeply engrossed and entrenched in this contributionist philosophy, if it's starting to filter through and resonate with you in your soul, you will start getting the answers yourself. I don't want to give you the answers until you get stuck or you struggle with it, because I believe that every single one of us will be able to find these answers for yourself, just like I found them. If I could find the answers, so can you. You just have to step away from money and the control systems, and you'll see how quickly and easily you'll be able to deal with this. So the plan of action. What is our plan of action? Creating a new alternative with no violence, no opposition, no conflict, no resistance, no protests. When we build it, they will come. This we know because of some of the experiments and the experiences we've had, like in the small Canadian town of North Frontenac, where Mayor Ron Higgins came very close to successfully launch this. What we know is that the people love it. They want to do it. The one missing link in North Frontenac was the source of electricity. But I will deal with this in a separate plan of action and a separate video where I will cover the One Small Town strategy. We cooperate and we collaborate, everything becomes possible. Remember, only through unity comes infinite diversity and abundance and possibility. If we unite, cooperate and collaborate, we will achieve anything imaginable. If we get rid of capitalism, get rid of competition, everything becomes possible. A world free of money suddenly sprouts forth. No crime, no envy, no gluttony, no greed, no hoarding, no hierarchy, no hunger, because everything is possible. Everything is possible and everything is available to you as an individual, because whatever you want, you can go and do. If it's not available, you can initiate it and create it and make it possible. So not only you can benefit from it, but everybody else can benefit from it. So, as I mentioned earlier, since 2005 to 2016, when the philosophy of contributionism was evolving and becoming fully mature, we did a lot of things. And here's a list of the things we did. We started community projects and learned how difficult community projects are. We had food gardens, intentional communities. And I must tell you right now that the contributionist philosophy is not about creating self-sustaining intentional communities. They are a nightmare. I'll be talking about those again in a separate presentation. If you think that this is all about creating off-the-grid self-sustaining communities, you are completely wrong. Come back and learn about how we use the tools of enslavement as tools of liberation. And by that I mean money itself, so that our communities actually become incredibly rich in money, but we don't need the money in the communities that we are creating. So we started intentional communities, volunteerism, and we learned about how volunteers work and how they don't work, and how they can actually destroy the original dream and idea. We did petitions to banks, to the Reserve Bank, to the government. I delivered presentations and petitions to presidents and state attorneys. We marched against the banks, and we went to the High Court and the Constitutional Court. And as I said, we got involved in politics in 4 different countries with the Ubuntu Party. What have we learned since then? We've learned that intentional communities don't work. Why should we start intentional communities from scratch, building stuff up and creating infrastructure when we already have existing towns and communities with all the infrastructure in it? And that was a very important and a sobering moment when that penny finally dropped. We don't need to create self-sustaining intentional communities. They are a nightmare. And if you intend of setting that up, I'd like to just give you a fair warning. I've been involved in several of these, and all I've seen is it always starts out very lovely. Everyone is so utopian, and everyone has these wonderful dreams and imagine this lovely community that they're going to live in. Unfortunately, the reality is very different, because somebody somewhere has to fund it. And it's unfortunately that funding of that self-sustaining or intentional community in which lies the problem. And I've seen friends lose their farms, families being torn apart, best friends fighting each other and wanting to kill each other, people arguing about all kinds of stuff. Intentional communities are not a solution. Existing towns and villages are the solution. They have everything they need. They have the infrastructure, they have houses, roads, plumbing, sewage, electricity, everything is there. All we got to do is change the way that people think. All we got to do is make them imagine that this is an intentional community, and we're going to start working together and creating abundance and prosperity for our little town and our community. We tried community projects. As long as I funded the community projects, everything was great. Everything worked beautifully. The moment I stopped funding the community projects, everything fell apart. And I'm sure that there'll be thousands of people that watch this that would have had a very similar experience. Someone somewhere always has to fund it. And therein lies the problem. So whatever we do, however we want to create a new social structure, we need to ensure that we have sufficient funding that keeps flowing into our community to fund all the things that we intend to do. And that's exactly what we figured out how to do, using the tools of enslavement as tools of liberation. Not just sufficient money, but an abundance of money and an abundance of investments from greedy capitalists who will actually fund the initiation of this new initiative, the launch of this new initiative. Charities. People think, oh, charities might be a solution. No, charities is one of the worst things that could have happened. Keep in mind that the largest charities in the world are actually owned by the bankers. They set them up to create a distraction. So the biggest charities in the world are the ones that are destroying the world. And if you see an ad on television, on mainstream television for a charity, just ask yourself, where is that charity finding the money to be able to advertise on mainstream television that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars I know, I run a non-profit company. The Ubuntu movement has been a non-profit company. We don't even have enough money to pay our bloody rent and electricity at the end of the month. Trying to do all these community projects and all the stuff that we've managed to do since 2005. I know how tough it is to run a non-profit company and do all these projects. How does a charity afford to advertise on television? And you should have the answer to that by now. So we got involved in politics, right? We learned a great deal. The experience, the strategy, we got great support from all the people around the world when we were running in politics, but unfortunately it didn't work. But what it did do is it taught us what not to do. And that is probably the most important lesson and the reason why I had to go into politics, to learn what not to do and how the political arena actually works, how it is completely and utterly controlled and how the outcomes are controlled and manipulated. So politics didn't work. I ran for president on the 7th of May in 2014. There's me against the big blue screens on the final days of the elections as the results were coming in. And it's really in those last 4 or 5 days that I realized how corrupt and premeditated the outcome of the elections are. We ran in the UK on the 7th of May 2015 in 2 areas, and then again in 2016 we ran in the municipal elections in South Africa, and that's already when we started to implement the idea and the plan of a one small town. Rather than going for government, running for president, realizing that the power lies with the people in the small towns, and that's where we can start making rapid effects and changes on the ground among the people. And then also in 2016, Liam Manley in New South Wales ran for Senator of New South Wales in Australia under the Ubuntu banner. So we've learned a great deal since 2005, and this is why I can speak so vocally and so passionately and so confidently about what not to do. We've walked the talk, we've done 10,000 hours, probably at this stage 50,000 hours of experience. We now know what not to do, and even more importantly, we know exactly how to do this, how to implement this new reality and the new social structure without any violence, opposition or conflict. And that's what our new plan is all about, to create a new alternative. I hope that you will embrace this, that you will digest it, learn as much as you can. Don't just assume you know or think you know because you have an open mind. Please learn from our experiences and absorb this knowledge and this information. No violence, no opposition, no conflict, no resistance, no protest. When we build it, they will come. Why? This I will share with you in a new video that strictly focuses on the plan of implementation and the very simple steps of implementation that will take us to one small town. One small town can change the world. And one small town will change the world. We've had quite a bit of experience in this in Canada, in other small towns, in other areas around the world where we've seen how it attracts investors, how it brings the money and investment into a town where the mayor has chosen to go this new way, the support of the people, and how the face and the energy of the town literally changes overnight and becomes a foundation for prosperity and abundance for all its people. But I will share the plan of action of one small town in a separate video. Right now, what I'd like to ask you to do is share this video with everybody. Go out and read the book. Get the Ubuntu book so you actually read what I've shared here with you, but in much more detail about the origins of money, the banking, and so much more, so that you have a full depth of knowledge and information about this. Share this presentation with everyone you know. If people are new to this, hopefully it'll give them the foundation of truly comprehending, understanding what's going on, how the banking and ancient civilizations and how far back it goes and how they've controlled and manipulated our lives and our governments and our world. And then do something. Don't just sit on the fence. Don't think that someone else is going to do something. Join the Ubuntu movement. Go online. Become a member. Make a monthly subscription if you can, because that'll help us at head office to make this strong and help us to support all the people around the world that are active in the Ubuntu movement. Start a meetup group, share the philosophy, share the one small town strategy, read the Ubuntu book so everyone is on the same page. Don't just assume you know. Read the letter to the mayor, learn all about the one small town, and once you've done that, then take action. But it starts with you in your small town, your community, whether it's a city or a suburb in a city. You can still do this. You don't have to live in a small town. Most important thing is that it is now in your hands. There's not much more I can do other than just sharing this philosophy and this idea with you and the rest of those people that resonate with us. Start a meetup group, share this information, read the book, and take action as we show on our website. I hope this has given you enough insight and information. Please watch all the other videos related to this. And I wish you great success in implementing the one small town strategy wherever you may be. Be the seed of consciousness in your area. Until later, this is Michael Tellinger.